I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
We're still in a society where society wants you to think you need to be chosen when the reality is you could choose yourself. Now, on the quote you read, that is sort of the crux of the book, which is not, oh, you could start your own business or you could self-publish or you could just put your TV show on YouTube. The real crux of it is you have to have inside of you the ability to realize that choosing yourself is possible because you're at bottom. So you can't, and you're feeling horrible. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to put my TV show on YouTube because you're feeling so horrible about yourself. You can't do that. So I write in one of the first chapters about something I call the daily practice, which is really you have to go inside. And I think this is why people categorized it as self-help, even though I don't consider it that way. You have to go inside. You have to be physically healthy. And I write about that. You know, I basically write eat, move, sleep better and, you know, improve on that 1% a day. You have to be emotionally healthy. And in the quote you read, you have to be around people who help you and people who you help, and you build your team and your scene. And you know, and there's historical cases like, you know, you look at like the writers of the 50s, the beat movement. It's not like Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg were all separately successful. They actually were in a creative writing class together. Allen, you know, at one point. And then 10 years later, Allen Ginsberg flew to Morocco when his good buddy William S. Burroughs was totally strung out on heroin, and he edited all these random pieces of paper on the floor, put it together, and that became the best-selling Naked Lunch. And, you know, all these guys like worked together. They built their scene. If you look at the artists of the 50s, like Jasper Johns, Jackson Pollock, all these guys, they practically lived together. They found their scene. They grew up with them. If you look at Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all these guys who were the first wave of Silicon Valley, and then all these guys who were the first wave of the internet, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they all literally grew up together in the industry. They found their scene that they could grow up with.
Spielberg, George Lucas,
Yeah, Spielberg, George Lucas.
Brian De Palma, Scorsese.
They were kind of like hanging out, you know, practically like indie film students hanging out at the local cafe, you know, brainstorming on, you know, how to make The Godfather and American Graffiti and, you know, all of those first wave of brilliant 70s movies, maybe the best movies ever made. And you were talking about something earlier, a scene, well, certainly in comedy, you know, all these comedians sort of grow up together. Like, you know, Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David were hanging out together when they can't come up with the idea of Seinfeld. Or you know, so many examples from history of people who, you know, they were physically healthy and my quote in the book too is, if you're sick in bed, you can't come up with new ideas. So you have to be healthy. Then You have to be emotionally healthy. Like, it's like you don't waste time. I didn't want to waste any more time convincing my agent to like me if he was going to be so angry at me. So I just never spoke to him again. I actually ran into him in a bookstore once, and he yelled at me again for what I did for dropping him. But I just said, well, good luck. But you can't waste time on toxic people. You can't waste time on toxic relationships. I never, maybe too much so. If someone is even mildly toxic, I drop them instantly, which has also caused some problems for me because it's not like a 3 strikes and you're out. It's like a 1 strike and you're out in most cases.
What are some examples of toxic people?
Well, certainly many relationships, Chris Rock even talks about this in his recent Netflix special, Tambourine. And by the way, that's a great example of a scene. Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., they all kind of grew up in comedy at the same time and became huge. But Chris Rock talks about in romantic relationships, don't try to compete with your significant other. Support each other. And there's a lot of evidence. One scientist studied 2,000 couples. I forget the exact study, but what types of couples stick together for more than 30 years? It's not the people who stuck together in hard times. It's the people who stuck together when times were good.
Oh, interesting.
Because, let's say you're married and you're living in New York City and your wife gets a movie role and has to move to LA for 6 months. You have to be supportive and so she could focus on that and then come back to you and then you stick together. If you're competing well, you're not going, right? Well, because I live in New York and I have a job, then that's bad for the relationship. And that's toxic. So, or many bosses are toxic if they're not focused on how to motivate an employee other than just money, then that's toxic. Many friendships are toxic. I've had strong family relationships where as my writing started to get many more readers, and by the way, when I stopped writing about finance and started writing these stories relating to choosing yourself, all these insane stories I was writing, my audience multiplied by 10. I had good family relationships with people who were also writers, and they just simply stopped talking to me.
Yeah, I think that's the type of people, and we talk about you're the average of the people you spend the time with, and I think I always want to be around people who want the same bright future for me than they want for themselves, not to people who relegate you to something. And there's something Jen Sincero talked to us about, where when she was successful, it killed her pal. People like to see you as the sidekick or the kind of person who might be inept at certain things. They don't want to see you.
Yeah, when I sold my first company, 0 of the friends I had then are still my friends now.
Wow.
Because then I went down and out. First, I was successful, so that lost a bunch of people. Then I went down and out, so that lost a bunch of people. And, by the end of that, between family members and friends, I lost almost everybody. Yeah. And you have to always, and you can't hold on to the past. You have to be able to move forward and say, look, I need to be around people who are good for me and who I could be good for. This is why, look, I had met you already once. You had me on Good Day New York after the minimalism article about me came out in the New York Times. And you did me a favor. You put me on the same day as Lori Hernandez, who won the silver medal or the gold, one of the medals in gymnastics. I didn't know really who she was, but my sister, my daughter, Molly, was a huge fan of hers and came with me and met her, and we took a photo. I still have the photo on my Instagram. And the second time I met you, there's an interesting coincidence. I had just had breakfast with Ryan Holiday, and who was only in town for the day, and he told me he was going over to Good Day New York. And I'm like, oh, I'll just keep you company because you're about to go on TV. Everybody's a little nervous when they're going on TV. So I go there, and we're in the green room, and he was introducing himself to people. I was just kind of laying low, or I was saying to people like Brad Thor, yeah, Ryan wrote this, and this. I was almost like Ryan's publicist.
Yeah.
Ryan was even trying to get me to push myself a little more. I was having none of that. And, because Ryan Holiday has been part of my scene for years at that point. And you noticed that, and
I like that. I liked how you were very, because I think, I was like, this is the most accomplished guy here. And Ryan's a brilliant guy. I love his stuff. But And I just liked the way you kind of conducted yourself, where you were just happy to kind of go along with them. And that showed me a lot. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And I remember I had all those interns around me and we were just talking about a lot of different stuff. I remember talking about marketing with Ryan and LeVar Ball. You knew very little about sports. So you didn't, but like, and I was telling, the interns and people around there, I was like, guys, this guy's a brilliant guy. Like James, like, you should open your eyes to say, like, it's not just the people who have the shiniest, brightest people. There's a lot of value there, and you should.
But Ryan had just had one of his books just came
Perennial
out.
Seller
Perennial
was a
Seller, which
great
was a great book, and I wanted him to push it. I wanted to help him.
Great.
He came on my podcast for that book. But the reason I say there was a coincidence there is that I wrote an article once, which I don't think it's in Choose Yourself. It might be in Reinvent Yourself. Let me just see if it's in Choose Yourself. But the article was called. Oh no, it definitely wasn't in here. But the article was called "Who is in Your Scene," and it was about this topic.
Yeah.
And within seconds of hitting publish on that article, Ryan Holiday had wrote me and said, "I feel like we're building our scene."
Oh, wow.
Because Ryan and I knew Tucker Max, Tim Ferriss, we were all kind of doing the same, or not the same, but similar types of things. Lewis Howes, AJ Jacobs, we were all kind of helping each other do things.
It's amazing.
But anyway, so this daily practice, I'll just quicken it up, is physical health, emotional health, which is, being around good people, not being around toxic people. Creative health, which is, I describe it as just, and this was a real thing that happened to me, is I didn't start bouncing back until I bought 100 waiter's pads and I started writing down 10 ideas a day. Why a waiter's pad? Because you could only fit, you can't write a whole novel. You could only write one small idea. It has to be really concise bullet points. So I practiced exercising my idea muscle, and I'd write 10 ideas a day. And then I started writing 10 ideas a day for other people, and I would send it to them. So I would send to Amazon, here's 10 ideas for your self-publishing group. And sometimes amazing things would happen. Amazon invited me to come out to Seattle, and they introduced me to everybody in their self-publishing group and asked my opinion about all their different new products and so on. I've flown out to Amazon, LinkedIn, Google. I've met the Quora people. So many companies, the 10 ideas a day, when I send to them, I've gotten benefit from that.
But why do you think a lot of people don't want to send ideas like that? They hold on to it too much.
I think people have a scarcity complex. They feel like they're not good enough, so that if they have this idea, maybe someone else will implement it or take credit for it. They're afraid that they won't be given credit. The way I wrote a book called The Rich Employee at one point after Choose Yourself, which is if you want to succeed at a job, make sure your boss gets all the credit for everything you do.
Sure.
And that's what I did at HBO. Is my boss kept getting promotion after promotion once I started, because I would give him credit for HBO.com. He did it. And I would just give, when we were running to the CEO, this is the guy who did HBO.com, not me. And I would just give credit after credit to my bosses wherever I worked. And so I think people feel, the average person, not the average person, but a lot of people feel, if I don't stand up for myself and take credit for what I did or hold on to my ideas, then someone's going to screw me. And you see this a lot in the investing world. I used to be a venture capitalist where people would pitch me ideas. Companies would come in and say, we need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement so you can't, this agreement makes sure you can't steal our idea. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're, why would I take your idea? I get pitched ideas all day long. Why would I suddenly take this one idea, and you who have been building it for years maybe, why would I think I could do it better than you? And I would hope that you're passionate enough about your idea that you would think to yourself, anyone who competes with me is going to be crushed because no one's going to know more than me. When I did stockpicker.com, I realized too late there were 5 other players in that particular space. It was like a social media site for investing.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, I already spent the money and I'm almost done with this. There's 5 other competitors. I didn't even do any competitive research. But then I thought to myself, who is going to know more about investing strategies, website development, all the top investors than me? No one was able to compete. We were by far
and
the best.
It's kind of like choosing faith over fear, like choosing your faith in your ability. Could you explain what Stock Picker was?
Yeah, it was just a way to enter in your portfolio of stocks or portfolio of stocks you were interested in. And then I wrote algorithms to match people. It's almost like a dating thing, like match people with portfolios similar. So you would then start to follow other investors similar to you. But I also put all the portfolios of the best investors in the world, because they have to disclose them. So Warren Buffett, Carl Icahn, George Soros, I put all their portfolios on Stock Picker as
Wow.
well. So then you could see, it could be an educational thing. You could do, you could see what stocks was Warren Buffett in, or what stocks is George Soros in. And then I made a message boards, and then I also made a Q&A, so anybody could ask any question and anyone could answer. So I made that feature, and Jim Cramer started answering all the questions. Like literally in between commercials on his show, I could see him answering questions on Stock Picker. So we had millions of users, and Jim Cramer was the most popular user, and I was the second most popular user.
Wow.
And so eventually TheStreet.com bought the
That's
site.
terrific. Yeah. So you chose yourself with that company, and it was like the old football coach and owner Al Davis used to say, like, we don't take what the defense gives us, we take what we want.
Right, and I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I had started 9, around that time, 2 things happened. One is I was running a pretty big hedge fund, and a bank wanted to buy it, but they wanted to, a major bank, but they wanted me to sign a 6-year employment agreement. And if they fired me at any point, like at their own whim, they could just get all the money back. And I wasn't allowed to write. And so I turned that deal down. I realized, you know what? I built this business that was paying the bills and doing well, this hedge fund business, but I didn't create any value, because it was the only thing they were valuing was me, not the business. And so I said, I've got to shut this business down, which I did instantly. Like, you got to if you realize something like that, you got to take action. So the very next day, I sent emails to all the investors, and I said, we're shutting it down. And fortunately, we did that. It was like a year before the financial crisis. And then I started coming up with ideas. I did my 10 ideas a day. I started coming up with ideas for websites. So I built like a dating website. I built like a testing education website. I built all these websites. The only thing that got traction, and my business partner said, you know what? We just had 9 failures in a row. All of them were horrible. We would get no traffic. We just did 9 failures in a row. Let's just give up on this and get back to the hedge fund game. We'll build a new hedge fund. And I'm like, no, let's just try this one other thing, because it's related to investing. We built that, and it just got huge almost instantly. But it goes to show you, having lots of ideas doesn't mean, people say ideas are a dime a dozen. It's actually really hard to come up with a good idea. And then also, it's really hard to, people say execution is everything. It's hard to execute. And execution, once I had a good idea, the next day I would come up with what I call execution ideas. So how am I going to make this website? Well, I had to spec out what each page looked like. That's 10 ideas per page. And so ultimately, by the time this website was done, there were like hundreds of ideas built into this site.
Sure.
So that's why none of the competition could even come close to me. I had every investment strategy I'd ever looked at for the prior 8 years baked into this website. And we had software running behind the scenes, generating signals for investment and trades. Anyway.
It kind of speaks to your skill stack too, like what we always talk about with.
Yeah, like Scott Adams says, I'm not the best at drawing, but I'm pretty good. I'm not the best at business, but I'm pretty good. I'm not the funniest guy, but I'm pretty good. You combine that, what he calls his talent stack, and what I call idea sex in this book, Choose Yourself, and you become the best at that intersection. And so I always kind of I say, okay, I'm good at investing, and I'm good at all these strategies, and I'm good at software, and I've also been a website designer, so I'm good at design, figuring out how people use websites. I had a web design company, and I have a lot of relationships in the investment space. So I combined all of that and created an enormous website.
Could you tell me about some of the people who...
Which by then I lost all my money after that. I sold that site, made millions, and I burned through all of that. So I hadn't yet internally chosen myself.
But could you tell me about like some of the people who've really been touched by Choose Yourself, and how does that make you feel when they've come to you and said, hey, I read your book, I quit my job.
Right. So
yeah.
So I write in the very beginning about this daily practice, which is physical health, emotional health, creative health. And then the final thing is spiritual health, which sounds new agey or gooey, but it really just means surrender control over, kind of like the AA thing almost, like surrender control over the things you can't control. Like I couldn't convince my agent years earlier to publish a book idea I had, so I got rid of him and without even thinking about it. No resentment, no bad feelings. I surrendered control over that process and using my 10 ideas a day, figured out a different process because my idea muscle had built up by then, doing the 10 ideas a day. And I was surrounding myself. I would always eliminate toxic people and surround myself with good people. So got rid of the agent and started building more relationships in the publishing world on my own. So that's how every day you could switch the toxic people to the good people. So, and I was exercising every day and I was trying to eat well and, and I was, not necessarily, I was doing whatever you would consider spiritual stuff. I was trying to do that every day. And then I just wrote a lot of other stories around those ideas, like how do you execute things? And I would tell stories, or how do you go from being stuck to unstuck, or how do you find your purpose in life? I'm reading just chapters in this book.
But I feel like it's like when we spoke to Richard Branson, you said, well, what if you're not a billionaire? What if you're not handsome? What if you're not extroverted? How do you do this? And I think like people who want to self-reject or are a little afraid or having an experience will say, well, James, you're a master in chess. Like you're a computer programmer. You went to an Ivy League college. You came from a middle-class background. What I can't do it.
Okay, well, at that time when I wrote Choose Yourself, in the period that Choose Yourself is kind of roughly based on, there's a couple different periods, but let's say aggregating them together, I had no money, so all my degrees and my background were wasted. I had no parents at that point, and no family. I wasn't living in New York City, which is where I was living in a place where there was no opportunity. What were something? I certainly wasn't handsome enough to get any special jobs or treatment because of that. Nobody was giving me anything because I was a chess master or because I went to college. Like nobody was even returning my calls. So I had to really.
So a lot of it's like if you could do it, maybe
right.
Other people can.
Right. So I was again suicidal at different points, and and you could see it in some of the titles. Like there's one chapter titled "Choose Yourself to Live." Another title is "What If I'm in a Crisis." Another chapter, which became one of the more popular ones, "The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Mediocre People," because most people are just, and I include myself, most people are just mediocre. We're not, Richard Branson, who's I consider very special, or we don't have the physical prowess of like, let's say a Tony Hawk in skateboarding, or we don't have, I don't know, who are some of the many other people on the podcast. Yeah. We don't have the chess playing ability of Gary Kasparov. We don't have the business ability of the 15 billionaires that I've had on this podcast, or like Sarah Blakely, Richard Branson, Mark Cuban, and so on. I considered myself very mediocre, and I had to, some of these habits. What do you do if you procrastinate a lot? What if you do?
I'll tell you tomorrow.
That was
too easy.
That was a good joke.
I tried.
I appreciate it. What if your ideas are not original? What if you're not good at multitasking, or if you keep failing, or if you're desperate for a yes, or if you're a poor judge of people? Like I've always been a poor judge of people. So how can I work around that? And so I wrote a whole chapter on this that was actually very...
you addressed people's concerns head on, is what you did. Yeah.
Like I am a horrible judge of people. Like I make those split-second judgments, like Malcolm Gladwell says in the book Blink. I think I even referenced Blink in that chapter. And I'm almost always wrong on my split-second judgments. And so, and yet despite that, just by doing those 4 things, physical health, emotional health, creative health, spiritual health, and getting 1% better at those 4 things every day, I realized, I'm creating opportunities for myself in many, many areas of life. Like right now, I have so many different things I'm involved in because this aspect of internally choosing yourself compounds.
And you still do it.
Yeah, every day. When I don't do it every day, I can feel it all slipping. All the opportunities start to go away. And, I have opportunities where we do this podcast. I have opportunities in writing. I have opportunities in business. I have opportunities in investing that, if I write to a company now with my 10 ideas, often they respond because I get the idea. I really sharpen the ideas and figure out who to write to. And then they might give me opportunities like speaking opportunities or consulting opportunities. And I even have a chapter. Let's get specific. What should I do? Like this book really fit all of people's, told my stories, and then it gave very specific advice and backed up by not only my stories, but I would tell stories about, I write about Sarah Blakely in this book. I write about so many interesting people in this book who chose themselves.
And what you talk about Sarah in the book about?
Well, about how she was selling fax machines and she didn't like it. And she didn't have any experience in the fashion business. She didn't have any experience sewing. And yet somehow she made a multi-billion-dollar fashion line called Spanx. And I kind of document that story of how she did it and why that's an example of her choosing herself, but how it started. I always look for choose yourself stories where they don't need anyone's permission and they don't need any validation from an external source. Like she doesn't have a PhD in fashion, or she didn't work at Chanel or a department store or anything like that. She had no experience at all. But she figured it out on her own with the help of others. But she did, as Ken Langone, a billionaire, the founder of Home Depot, said in this podcast, nobody is self-made. She figured out with the help of a lot of people. But I always get back to the core, which is how is she physically healthy? How is she emotionally healthy? Creatively healthy? Spiritually healthy? Because it always boils down to those four things. Nobody can choose themselves without being good at those four things. But then they do these other things, like she gave herself permission. Look, there was one great story with her. She sold, I think it was to Neiman Marcus. She sold I'm going to make up a number, but she sold like 100,000 items of her main product. She had no idea. She sold it. Then she realized she had no manufacturer. She had no idea how she was going to make it. And she had a timeline. She had to deliver it like in a matter of weeks. So that's a very choose yourself kind of story.
I liked where I remember her saying where, she was careful if she told her friends, like, hey, I have this idea called Spanx. And they might have said, well, Sarah, if it's such a great idea, why didn't somebody else come up with it? Or, hey, isn't it just so kind of like pantyhose that's cut off, and so she didn't allow herself to let other she chose herself, and she didn't allow other people to creep in their negativity or their limiting beliefs and for her to adopt them.
Yeah. And that's not an example of scarcity. That's an example of being emotionally healthy. Like she didn't want any toxic opinions to, people are not, it's very hard to give constructive criticism. So even if someone's not toxic to you, their criticism might be toxic because like any skill, criticism is a skill, and 99% of people, like in any hard skill, 99% of people are not so good at it. So most criticism is destructive and can throw people off. Sarah Blakely had this internal sense about that, and so she wouldn't seek out advice because it would turn out it wouldn't be constructive usually. And I think the other thing about Sarah is, which she said on our podcast actually, she said every week her father would sit everybody down for dinner and say, what did you fail at this week? And he wouldn't be happy unless you failed at something and learned from it. So that, you learn when choosing yourself, you're going to get, you're going to fail a lot more than you're going to succeed because no one's just giving you the red carpet treatment. You have to make every stitch of that red carpet and then roll it out for yourself. And that's hard to do. And you're going to fail a lot at doing it. So you have to be comfortable with sitting with that awful, you don't have to fail to succeed, but you have to get comfortable with sitting with that awful feeling of failure, because then you can bounce back from it. And all these things, I write about all these choose yourself stories. I give specific advice. So, and then even the publication in this book, I had publishers who were calling me every day because my writing was getting all over the place. And I decided I was going to self-publish this because that's how I was going to choose myself. I didn't need a publisher to take 85% of my profits and then an agent to take another 20% on top of that. The average writer makes about 12% on the wholesale price of their book. So if a book is in the bookstore for $20, the wholesale price might be $12 or $10. You're only making like $1 off of every book. You know how many books the average book, this is a very interesting statistic. The average book that wins the National Book Award. So somebody decides this is the best book written of the past year. Do you know how many copies on average it has sold at that point that it's selected for the winner?
No, I do not.
Less than 2,000 copies.
That's unbelievable.
So even if you write a great book because you're super talented and you're validated because someone selected you, someone published you, put you in bookstores, and you were selected by a committee of great writers that this is the best book of the year, you've still only sold less than 2,000 copies on average.
Wow.
And so I figured, okay, this is a book that I want people to read. I don't want to just get the validation of, oh, this fancy publisher published me and I got on the New York Times bestseller list. I didn't want bragging rights. I wanted people to read it because I felt this could help people. So the very first page, I even wrote, before the book starts, I wrote, before the table of contents, I write a page called Here's the Deal. I said, I don't need to make a dime off this book. Anybody who reads this book and tries these ideas and wants their money back, I will completely refund the money. I gave them like 4 or 5 months to do this. And some of my friends were worried I was going to go broke because, Amazon keeps a little bit of a cut when you self-publish, but I was going to pay back the full amount. And only 1% of the people who bought the book in those 4 months asked me for their money back. And I set up my kids and me, we were like in an assembly line, like writing checks, licking envelopes, licking stamps, until my 9-year-old started crying like she didn't want to do it anymore, and I finished it off. But because there was 1% was a big number because I sold a lot of copies. But you write. This isn't one of these ineffectual self-help books designed to look good on your shelf. You either read the book and use these ideas, or you shouldn't bother. That's why you have to front the purchase price. But if you can prove to me that you have actually read the book, I will give you your money back. It's an investment that's all upside on your part. So, and this is a testament to those 4 pillars that I call the daily practice. So you know who came up actually with that exact line? Because I was trying to figure out how to word it.
Yeah.
So Tucker Max came up with that exact line because he was. I reached out to him. I even visited him in Austin to tell him my idea for Choose Yourself. He said, this is great. I'll help you figure out how to market it. He introduced me to an editor who edited it. Then,
what were your alternative titles?
So then,
because he's very sharp, Tucker, about like titling it and the importance of it.
So Tucker, Ryan Holiday,
sure,
and
so smart guys.
We got together and we brainstormed ideas for the book. And I had 2 choices, Choose Yourself and the Choose Yourself era. Like we live in this era where choosing yourself is possible now because of technology. But I kept thinking that wasn't so good because era sounds like error. So it's almost like the Choose Yourself error. And Tucker said, let's go with Pick Yourself. And then Ryan had another title, I forget now. But then what I did was I made Facebook ads with each title. Buy, Pick Yourself Now. Buy Choose Yourself Now. And I put the ads on Facebook and I gave them each a budget of about $50. And then whichever ad people clicked, the ad clicked to no place, but I could see who clicked on what.
Wow.
And I think 80% or 70% clicked on the Choose Yourself ad. Maybe like 20% clicked on the Pick Yourself. Maybe like 10% clicked on, or 5% clicked on the Choose Yourself era, and then a few percent clicked on Ryan's choice. And so Choose Yourself was clearly the winner. So I went with Choose Yourself. And I hired a designer to design the cover instead of just using a template. And I hired an interior designer to design the interior. Like I really chose myself to make almost like a mini publishing company. I did everything super cheap, but I still hired professionals.
Now I'm looking at this cover though, and I don't think it's like world's greatest cover.
No, The cover is the same guy who designed, the book City of Thieves
Yeah,
by
sure.
Mark Bennett. I think it's the same cover
Oh,
designer as
wow.
that.
Wow. No, because I always wonder what goes into some of these designs, and
Yeah, no,
it's neat. It looks kind of cool for
yeah,
those of you
like
who
that
are.
was it. It just looked professional. It didn't look
Yeah, I like
like
it.
it didn't
No, I
look
definitely.
self-published. It looked like professionally published.
Sure.
And I used the name of Tucker's company, Lioncrest Publishing, as the publisher, so people wouldn't necessarily automatically assume it was self-published. Not that I was misleading. Lioncrest Publishing did help me publish this. I hired someone working for Tucker to upload it to Amazon and convert it to so it could be for print and for Kindle. And Tucker gave me good advice on how to make the audiobook. So I read this as an audiobook. And actually, I kind of riffed throughout the whole audiobook, so it's almost like a separate product because I didn't like reading straight off the page. And so this was really, even though, I wrote it, it was really and then Tucker's kind of editor throughout the years, this guy, Niels Parker, he was the editor of the book. So he was a great editor. He's like, why don't you move this chapter here, this chapter there? He asked me 1,000 questions about different lines. So it really was like a professionally done process. Ryan and I would brainstorm 6 months in advance. Ryan Holiday and I brainstorm ideas for marketing. Like I set up this is 2013. I set up before I published it on Amazon, I set up my own store, but it would only accepted Bitcoins to publish this book. So I wrote an article saying, I'm the best-selling Bitcoin-only author ever. CNBC had me on, and Herb Greenberg, a noted skeptic and a good friend, asked me, did you just do that Bitcoin-only thing for publicity? And I said, well, I'm on national television right now because of it, so you tell me. So it worked. I ran for Congress
Wow.
and then backed out of it. So I had a story in both, like a presidential candidate actually wanted to endorse me, and there was a whole story behind that. So I had a story that helped with the marketing there. I had the whole giveaway thing. Kevin Kelly had suggested the idea of giving away a book, giving the money back if they buy it, because they value it if they buy it.
Wow.
So even though, like I said, Tucker and I worked out that line, it was Kevin Kelly's, who's been on the podcast a couple of
Sure.
times, and he's famous for the article 1,000 True Fans. Kevin Kelly came up with the initial idea of have them pay for it so they value it and they'll read it, but then you're willing to give the money back. So, and he wanted to figure out a way.
They have to have some skin in the game, essentially.
He wanted to figure out a complicated way technically to do it
Yeah.
with Amazon. And I now have almost 2,000 reviews on this book.
Sure.
I remember one publisher told me if you get 1,300 reviews in his experience, your book's going to probably last forever. So now I've got 1,900 reviews,
Wow.
most of them 5-star reviews, and the book keeps selling. And then right after the book came out, I started getting all these calls and opportunities. I expanded upon the ideas. I wrote the Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth. I wrote a book that wasn't self-help at all, but just kind of like stories called the Choose Yourself Stories, which in retrospect was a bad title because it was more of a literary story book. I should have.
But so like you're careful to say like, hey, I didn't want this to be the self-help book. And what's that distinction?
Well, I think nobody knows how to help other people. Like I sort of feel like there's a little bit of ego saying, oh, read my book and you'll be better. I think the only thing you can do is say, this is what happened to me. This is a story about what happened to me and how I got out of this bad situation. You can either follow this advice or not. This is just my story. And then people could decide on their own. And then you have to write it well enough that they'll want to keep reading your stories.
Yeah.
So by me not calling myself self-help, I'm not leaning on that genre to sell copies. People will only read it if they like the writing and are getting actual benefit out of it, instead of, well, when keep reading it like, well, when am I going to get to, learn how to be more powerful or whatever? And the writing's all bad. On most books in any genre, the writing's really bad. So I didn't want to be just that. Now, maybe that hurt me a little bit by not claiming to be self-help, but I did actually the one book I traditionally published, the only book I traditionally published after this came out, and I've written 7 books since this came out. There's one book I wrote called The Power of No, which I did through Hay House, who is a known self-help publisher. And they called me up the day Choose Yourself was published or the day after and they said, we'll do any book you want.
Wow.
And I was just making a joke. I said, let's do The Power of Now, but without the W. And they said, done. And how much money do you want? And I picked a kind of a ridiculous number, and they said, done. And so I wrote The Power of No. And that became a Wall Street Journal bestseller and a USA Today bestseller. But, and then who else called me? I mean, I was on a ton of podcasts. I was on all the TV networks suddenly opened up. Every single publisher in the world called me. Every literary agent from the top on down called me.
And why do you think, in retrospect, it resonated with all those places?
Well, it resonated with them because they saw copies being sold. Like I was consistently number one in the entire Amazon store, not just with this book, but with
Not just with Bitcoin.
and well, with not just on Bitcoin, but the Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth hit number one. People always say, "Oh, an Amazon bestseller," it means they were number one in their category. But there's 6,000 categories in Amazon, so you just pick the category, so it's easy. But Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth was number one in the entire Amazon store. I mean, right after it was like a Harry Potter book and 50 Shades of Grey. Reinvent Yourself was number one in the entire Amazon store, beating out all the novels, all the nonfiction, everything.
Wow.
So agents saw this and other publishers saw this. So this is why I'm calling BS a little on the industry. Oh, they didn't like you until they liked you.
Right,
Why didn't
Interesting.
you call me in 1991 and nurture my career where you thought I had a little bit of talent? Or why did you dump me in 2009 when in the middle of a financial
most people
crisis?
are more reactive than proactive.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in general, I'm a huge fan of self-publishing, and we've had, well, A, we do a self-publishing course now in Choose Yourself Media, and B, I've done so many podcasts with self-published writers like Hugh Howey, Andy Weir. Most people don't know that The Martian was originally self-published. Most people don't know 50 Shades of Grey was originally self-published. Steve Scott's self-published like 60 books. Hal Elrod with The Miracle Morning, which has 3,000 reviews on it. He's self-publishes an entire series of Miracle Morning books. So you can basically do very well being self-published. And then that led to me wanting to create choose yourself kind of opportunities for people, which ultimately led to me starting a business, Choose Yourself Media. And again, I had a platform, but it was much bigger this time because it wasn't just, hey, what stocks to invest in, but it was like how you can really develop yourself and invest in yourself. And when you really feel full of doubt, you're at your worst moment, you're full of doubt, you're sick, you're feeling depressed, you have no opportunities in front of you, you have no creativity left, maybe everyone around you is an awful person, maybe you think all hope is lost. I think that was my audience.
Yeah. And I think it's also instructive that you did that, like when Arianna Huffington or other people talk about their different metrics to success, and even in the subtitle where you say, be happy, make millions, live the dream. And that should be, like, we all should define success for us in what it means. And it's not just external.
Yeah. And actually, in retrospect
validation.
now, I wouldn't use the subtitle because I think
making millions, you think?
Yeah, making millions is not necessarily important for lots of reasons, and not in the cliche reason that money's not everything. Money is certainly better than having zero, but everyone has a different number. And happy, there's nuances there in well-being and contentment are kind of more important concepts than happy, and I write about that in the Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth.
Or fulfillment even is a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And living the dream, that one maybe I'd keep. That's almost like a joke. Like I remember one time I was on CNBC and we were all getting ready to go live in like 30 seconds. And one of the anchors said to the other anchor, hey, how you doing? And the guy said in his deep anchorish voice, living the dream, living the dream. So I just thought it was like a funny phrase.
For sure.
So, but why not live the dream? And I don't know, so many opportunities came from this book and so many people read it. And like you say, Steve, we're walking around. People either it's funny now, more people now stop me because of the podcast, but for a long time, for many years, people stopped me because of this book. So, and people still stop me because of this book, but I would say people more stop me for the podcast at this point. Because the podcast is not only my stories and techniques, but the hundreds of billionaires, athletes, actors, writers, inventors, creatives who have succeeded in all their methods for success. So I think the podcast became a huge benefit. You know, it's which again I base a lot of Reinvent Yourself, and then my next book, Think Like a Billionaire, on things that happen in this podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be a part of it. You know, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, Steve Cohen, our podcasts together have been so great because you've taught me how to get like all the amazing guests that you've got. Like, I chose Steve Cohen.
Yeah, hallelujah.
to get
no, I'm very grateful.
all these great podcast
It's definitely
guests.
changed my life, and I do think that I'm able to evangelize for what you've been doing, you know, just unabashedly, because I see it. You know, I see it on a daily basis. I see how you treat people. I see how you've been successful. And I would say that I always liked, you know, and Dan Coyle wrote the Talent Code and he wrote the Culture Code. But in the Talent Code, one of the things he talks about was how in Korea, this golfer became number one. And it was kind of an ignition for everybody else. Like when you see somebody do it. So I feel like obviously seeing is believing. Yeah. And I think that I could watch people like you who are like, okay, well, maybe if he can do it, I can do it. You know, I don't have that same talent stack, but you know, why not? And
no, everybody does. That's why
Yeah.
First off, I have a whole chapter on how to deal with your most common excuses. I mean, most of the book really is answering the objections, because we all kind of start, humans are all basically similar, more or less. And then it's just what you do with this basic material that separates you. And that's about doing this daily practice and improving. And then the rest of the book is just my kind of insane stories of either doing it or not doing it and failing, or, and then dealing with all my excuses that I've always had and telling the stories of other people. I have a story here. I didn't even remember this title. Gandhi chose himself to free an entire country. So I talk about Gandhi's, how he chose himself. Our podcast about the Beatles. That's a chapter in Choose Yourself.
Sure.
And then I have a chapter, what to do when you're rejected, because I've been rejected so many times in so many different situations. And I always used to think to myself, gosh, if that person if Sheila Nevins had just accepted my TV show, I would have been a happy person now. But I'm so glad she rejected it, because amazing things happened. And it's learning how to roll with all these things and sitting with it.
Well, it's like Cheryl Richardson says, rejection's God's protection, so maybe you went a different route. And and I'm thrilled that, hopefully we engender that community that we've talked about, like where we have a lot of great people around us. And, those of you out there, welcome to join us.
Well, and by the way, you just mentioned Cheryl Richardson, who's a great self-help writer, actually.
Yes.
And she's been on the podcast.
Yeah.
Do you know the very first day I spoke to her was the day this book came out?
Oh, that's amazing.
She read it and called me to say, she had me on her show.
Wow.
That day, and said, "Come, I love this book." She called me and said, "I love this book. Can you come on my show?" She had a radio show. Come on my show and talk about it. You know who else I was on that day was Mary Lou Henner.
Wow.
And I spoke at a conference by Derek Halpern, who's kind of a business self-help kind of guy. But he had a really great conference. That video I think's gotten 200,000 or 300,000 views. So a lot of things started happening on that day that changed my life, and it brought together all the people in my life. And it, and even still, I have moments, or lots of moments of failure, but I just make sure, did I do Kamal? I'll call Kamal, like, I can't believe this one thing happened to me. And Kamal's like, are you doing your daily practice? And so Kamal reminds me, almost like an accountability partner. Are you sticking to what you say? Because it's people give advice, it's hard to follow it. So I have to make sure I follow my own advice and stick to it, or else I fail more than usual.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad to see you're still living Choose Yourself existence.
Well, thanks this is the 5th year, 5 years now, almost to the day since Choose Yourself was published. Next week, I know we're having a party podcast with Ryan Holiday, Q&A, comedians. I chose myself to be a stand-up comic a few years ago, among the many other things I do. And you don't know how many comedians who have been doing it for 20 years have said to me, you cannot do it this way. Like, you have to be doing it for 20 years. You have to build up with the open mics first, and then this, and then this, and then this. And I just skipped right to the front of the line and said, well, I'm choosing myself. And now, no, if you watch, I don't want to say anything. People should come see my act, but I challenge anyone to, separate me out from the people who've been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah, no, I think instead of saying why me, you should say why not me.
Yeah. You should write that book. Why not me? That'll be your choose yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So I challenge everybody. The exercise of the day is get yourself a waiter's pad, and you'll see what I mean, what a beautiful object it is. Like it's a work of art, the waiter's pad. And then just start writing 10 ideas a day. And within a month, you'll really notice the difference. Within 3 months, 6 months, it's like you built this new muscle in your brain. That's incredible. And anyway, that's it. Hopefully we'll do a 10th year anniversary podcast as well.
And wait, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.